information-wise and rumors and rumblings and all that good stuff. So let's do it. Adam Kaufman with Sean Grande, long-time, I always like to tell him that, long-time voice of the Celtics on the radio, and of course, Evan Valenti, our producer. Sean, how are you, buddy?
Every time my heart springs when I hear long-time voice, because I know what it means. I know what all of you are saying. I know what it's all about. Oh, yeah, I used to listen to you when I was in high school or when I was in – I get it. It's all code for the same thing. I understand.
Well, speaking of you being around for a long time, you've been around just a tidbit longer than, of course, the head coach of this team, Brad Stevens, good friend of yours, who today, as I'm sure you know, it's his birthday. 44 years young, still looks almost as young as he did when he got the job way back when he was – I think toward the end of year 36 of his rotations on the Earth here, rotations around the sun. What do you get Brad Stevens for his birthday? What did you get Brad Stevens?
Well, last night he didn't need any kind of gift because last night he did a fundraiser with Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Last night. I think I said something like I was disappointed they didn't ask me to write the jokes for that. Like, two guys, you need a strobe light to make it look like they're moving.
I watching the two of them.
I was shocked that they actually agreed to do this thing together, just because I've never seen both in the same place at the same time, so you can't say that they're not the same person.
Remember last Halloween, right? He dressed as Pete Buttigieg and gave out candy.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Vice versa too. Pete went as Brad. Just threw on a Celtics hat basically. I mean, so you can't really dress up when you're the two of them, but. I mean, can you believe it's been this long already? He's getting ready for his 8th season in Boston. In some ways, it sort of feels like he just got here. In other ways, especially when you look at Doc's tenure in LA and now that he's off to Philadelphia, it feels like an eternity.
And he's what, 3rd or 4th now on the list, like the longest tenured coaches now. And
right.
he was in the top 10 very quickly. Like it took like 2 years for Brad to be in the top 10 among the tenured coaches in the league. And it's really one of the things about the Celtics that's pretty extraordinary right now is you got Rick Carlisle in Dallas and Greg Popovich obviously in San Antonio, but the Celtics have had 2 head coaches now in 16 years. And obviously Brad's going to go into the 17th year now. You're going to have 2 head coaches. And that's because I think the Knicks have had about 40 during those 17 years. And that's really an amazing thing. Again, one of the highlights of an organization, which, as you know, we'll probably get to this point where I was beginning for the first time to lose some of my patience with the vocal minority among the fan base that were, so unhappy with the way this year ended. And the things are just not, again, Max and I specifically, because Tommy and Mike have always been on the other side. We've gotten some heat over the years for not being homer enough and whatever, but it's the first time I really feel like I've been pushed to the other side of that equation because I just couldn't fathom how coming off that train wreck that 2019 was, that the orange vanilla Coke season of 2019, that the Celtics being the 3rd best team in the entire league was somehow not good enough for anybody, let alone the 5 or 10% of fans that made noise about it.
Yeah, we had debates about that on this show about how much blame gets thrown around because everybody wants to play the blame game as soon as the season's over. And, I always since I started listening to Michael Lombardi, I've started to sort of evaluate things differently when it comes to evaluating team performance. And when you really step back and you look at it's not just A or B or C, it's a combination of everything. But the one thing I had a hard time with, Sean, was coming to the point where, is this really Brad's fault? People are like, oh, he's not adjusting for things. I'm like, how do you know he's not making adjustments? He's not the guy in the court turning the ball over 19 times in a game. He's not the guy missing shots. He puts his guys in situations that he thinks that they can execute, and when they don't execute, that's their problem, not really Brad's. I had a hard time understanding where people came from in terms of this is primarily Brad's fault. And I'm like, how do you analyze that? How do you go to that conclusion? Because I could easily make the conclusion of he's not out there missing shots. He didn't put this roster together either. This is Danny trying to put guys together and give Brad a team he thinks that Brad can handle. It's not, Brad's fault that, maybe they're missing a veteran here that they need or a backup point guard here that they need. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with guys on the court ultimately performing, and those guys didn't perform as well as Miami did. And give Miami a lot of credit because they overcame a whole lot to get where they were. So in the whole pantheon of blame, I, like you, Sean, found it hard to just solely blame Brad Stevens for all the Celtics' problems this season.
Well, here's what happened, right? Like among the many problems you have to have a strong opinion these days, or you don't get on a talk show. You can't, it's not a tweet that's going to get a lot of likes. You're not going to get on CNN or Fox if you somehow take the middle road and call things the way you actually see them, which is the fact that it was a disappointing end to the season, and the fact that it was an extraordinary year for the Celtics of overachievement or whatever. Those two things are both, you can have both of those things. Both of those things did happen. And I think we all know that if the Celtics had played Milwaukee in the Eastern Conference Finals and lost in a very competitive 6-game series in which they had outscored Milwaukee like they did Miami in the series, that it would have a different feel to it. But people just felt it was an opportunity lost, which it was. Of course, when you play the 5th seed and you have home court advantage in a non-home court situation and you're perceived to be the better team, it was a missed opportunity to get to the finals, as every trip to the conference finals in which you don't win is by definition. But I think the one thing that everyone forgot is that what I'm saying is the gospel truth. If it had been Milwaukee, people wouldn't have had nearly the same reaction. And yet Miami, they squeaked by the Celtics. They crushed Milwaukee. That wasn't close. They demolished the Bucks in that series, and Milwaukee was lucky to win the game in that series, that overtime game that Chris Middleton won for them. So now you got to look at the reality was, as Brad Stevens himself said many, many times, that thing was its own season. We tried, I know I tried to make it the continuation of that 1920 season, but it was its own entity. And in that entity, Miami was the second best team, and there's no question about it. They beat the Celtics, in the seeding games too, on top of 4 out of 6.
Well, so now obviously we need to look ahead, and this is what the offseason is going to be, as it always is. When you don't win a championship, it's how do you fix the team? And I don't think this is a team that needs a whole lot of fixing. It's certainly not like when the Isaiah Thomas-led group went to the conference finals. Danny Ainge was still thinking, okay, we know we're not there. We know we're not close enough. We need to blow things up in a matter of speaking if we have those opportunities. It's not going to be that kind of offseason, either in terms of personnel movement or in terms of opportunity, unless somebody shakes loose that nobody is talking or thinking about right now. What you have, basically, the bigger decisions are what happens if Gordon Hayward's contract. Does he opt in? Does he opt out? Try and extend? Does he just, outright leave? These are the options that are on the table for him. Obviously, Danny Ainge could explore trading him. It's one of the things that's out there right now. We've had multiple reports going back the last few weeks that the Pacers are very interested in trading for Gordon Hayward. As we know, Indiana native, started Butler. Maybe it's something in terms of a homecoming that he would actually be open to. I have no idea. Does it make sense, though, when you start to hear about Miles Turner, Victor Oladipo, things like that, in terms of making a deal work? Is this the type of thing that Danny Ainge would seriously look at and would make sense?
Well, Danny Ainge looks at everything. I mean, he always has, and he's certainly not going to be hesitant to pull the trigger on something big if he thinks it's going to improve the Celtics. But people, the answer to the question, the number one answer to the question is, what's the single biggest area the Celtics can improve in to make the jump, to close the gap or whatever, to take what happened this year, this amazing year, and push it even farther? The answer is health. That's the obvious answer. And, the fact that Gordon Hayward hasn't had a healthy year. He's been very, this last year, he was really, really good when he was healthy, but he wasn't healthy for a lot of the year. Kemba Walker wasn't completely healthy for a lot of the year. So I think I get why it's the number one topic, and we have a few months to fill, right, of trading all these draft picks up to move up in the draft and take somebody that we like at number 8 or number 7. That's all fun to do. I get it. But this is the danger of being an elite team, right? This is the danger of being the third best team out of 30, is that it's not easy to improve from 3, but it's pretty easy to drop back down from 3 if you make the wrong move and you make a mistake. I don't think, to me, it's hard to envision a scenario where Gordon does not opt in unless he wants to do some team friendly, type deal. I think the amalgam of all the events coming together in the offseason, trying to shuffle these things together in an unusual offseason. Where's the draft going to be? Where's free agency going to be? Things are sort of changing on the fly, as everything is. Like, for example, when we're going to ever have games again, things that change every day is going to make this especially difficult, and to me, even riskier to make major changes when we don't have our footing as to what the salary cap is going to be going forward. How much revenue damage was done and is going to be done to the league here over this, let's call it a 2-season thing, right? Because obviously last season was affected. Clearly next season is going to be affected in terms of revenue. How's all that going to shake out, in terms of the cap and what the Celtics will even be able to do? Obviously they're going to have that mid-level exception, but, not much else to add to it.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
No, please.
Well, this Gordon Hayward situation is interesting, and it's funny that you mentioned the salary cap, how it's going to change, and Ryan Bernardoni did a great thing with John Corrales the other day about how that $34.2 million number really isn't $34.2 million when you consider the salary cap's going down, and Gordon's number is directly related to the BRI and how much the players get accepted. It's a convoluted process that I don't fully understand. That's why I listen to Ryan and other guys like Ryan to explain it to me. Like I'm 5 because I don't.
I think we define great differently. If you said you did a great thing the other day, I mean that's
that's a good point.
It's putting a lot on and breaking down the.
Well, we are in the middle of a pandemic, so for me, it doesn't take much for things to be great. For me to change my understanding of a certain topic would be, in my opinion, somewhat great. But it does help because everybody. This is the biggest topic that anybody has is what does Gordon Hayward do? Does he take that, lock in that extension where he might lose some this year, right? Because he isn't going to get that $34.2 million, but he gives himself that long-term security. In your conversations with him and Danny and Brad, is that something they would look into, in your opinion? Would they look into maybe, bringing Gordon Hayward back as a guy past this year? Do you think they're looking that far down the road? Or are they more like a year-by-year thing with Gordon, considering his health and his history of just being snake bitten in the past with the Celtics?
Well, I think you have to. And again, it's to go back to the Doc Rivers, what used to be the most famous Doc Rivers quote. It isn't anymore because he has one that will now live for the ages. But
right.
The Doc Rivers quote about the number one ability in a player is availability, right? And as good as Gordon Hayward has been, you have to ask yourself, there's great questions when you look at a player who has been injury prone or whatever you want to say, Romeo Langford or whatever. Is that bad luck or is that a trend? Because we tend to say players that have been hurt always tend to get hurt. That isn't always true. Paul Molitor is a great case of a player who was injured early in his career. People started to write him off as a guy that wasn't going to be a very good player because he's always going to be hurt. And then he was very healthy in the second half of his career and had a Hall of Fame career. So you don't really know. I think all things being equal, as anxious as willing as Danny is, and as willing to look at anything, I think, again, you got to be pretty careful with this group that you have, because not only do you have Gordon Hayward and Kemba Walker as all-star veteran players who play at an elite level, you also have the mentality that they both bring, which is they have been the best player on a decent team, bad team, first-round playoff team. They've been that guy, and now they want to win. So you're bringing all-star caliber players, folding them into an environment where if it's Jaylen Brown's night or it's Jason Tatum's night, they're fine with that. They are good with that as long as they win. And so I bring it up only because we tend to focus on what everybody brings from a basketball standpoint and ignore what makes championship caliber teams and how the pieces fit together. And that in 2019, everybody couldn't – the number one sentiment among Celtic fans, you guys know this perfectly well because you talk to them and you deal with them and you read what they have to say and you hear what they have to say, is just give me a team I can root for. I hated this team so much in 2019. Please just give me a team I can root for that's competitive every night. And what did you get? You got a team that took a shot at a franchise record for most consecutive games without a double-digit loss until they lost the last game of the Eastern Conference Finals in that big run. They hadn't lost a game by double figures since Houston game in February. It was like 44 games. They were competitive every night. They played entertaining games. They played hard. And with the icing on the cake, they were significantly better than last year's team on top of it, which was kind of an off-the-radar concept when Kyrie walked and then Al Horford walked. No one was talking about the Celtics going farther than last year. They were talking about, can they be more entertaining, let alone win more games, go another round of the playoffs, and have a chance, obviously, to get to the NBA Finals and to be the Nate Silver pick. At some point in the second round, the Celtics were like the runaway favorite team to win the championship when they were up 2-0 on Toronto for whatever that, obviously whatever that's worth. But that's why I think it was such an amazing year. And now, well, let's get rid of Gordon Hayward because of this and that. Oh, okay. Well, if you get Miles Turner and Victor Oladipo, that's an interesting thing to discuss, certainly, and how those pieces would fit together. But how Kemba and Gordon Hayward fit with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that is a known commodity right now. And yeah, does Miles Turner give you something that you probably don't have on the roster right now? Sure. But you got to be I tend to always be more conservative and less, well, let's trade these 3 guys for these 4 guys. And, anything that by definition is blowing it up, ask yourself what you're blowing up. The 3rd best team in the NBA that is on a upward trajectory, is that what you want to blow up?
Well, look, we all understand the whole reason it keeps coming back to Gordon Hayward is because he is your only flexibility. Kemba's not getting traded. Tatum's not getting traded. Brown's not getting traded. Smart's not getting traded. The only guy that has any money that you can really move in an effort to bring somebody else in who's impactful is Gordon Hayward. And then obviously people look at the, not just the salary, but the performance, the injuries, everything else, and say, okay, it makes sense. Let's go get somebody else. But like you said, the fit with the team, I think if you really watch the games, this is where, people turn to basketball snobs versus the people that are just kind of the hot take artists or casually watch. That's where, those of us, the 3 of us among so many others say, no, but if you see the fit, if you look at what he does, when he has the ball, when he doesn't have the ball, both, offensively as a playmaker, never mind what volume is, you study efficiency, you look at defensively and what a good 2-way player he is and how he impacts winning on that side of the ball and yada yada yada, all the stuff we could do. But again, it keeps coming back to, okay, but do you want Gordon? Do you not want Gordon? How do you improve a team that, as you said, was 3rd? How do you make a jump? How do you improve a bench? Where do you get veterans? Where do you get size? Where do you get strength? Where do you angle things out? How do you attempt to improve upon your rebounding, whatever it may be? One of the more interesting, for lack of a better word, because I'm not totally sure interesting fits in this context, but one of the reports that is out there, in addition to everyone's perceived, or at least the Pacers' perceived interest in Gordon Hayward, is Celtics are said to be, and we've heard this before, keeping an eye on what is going on with the Cavaliers' contract talks with Andre Drummond. Now, my first instinct when it comes to Andre Drummond is you run the other way. I want no part of Andre Drummond in Boston, not because I don't like the guy. He didn't kick my dog. It's just not a good defender, can't shoot, can't stretch the floor, doesn't seem to fit Brad Stevens' system, makes a whole lot of money. Yes, he improves your rebounding. Yes, he can give you some points on the inside. I just don't really like the fit. But, and I'll save this for after what you have to say, some I don't know, attempts at compelling viewpoints looking the other way as to how he does work in is, could be entertained. How do you feel, as I ramble on, how do you feel about Andre Drummond in the Celtics uniform if getting him probably means giving up Gordon Hayward, by the way, just in an effort to even make the money work?
Well, I don't want to say he's not a good shooter, but if he tried to kick your dog, he might miss. Listen, Andre Drummond is a great rebounder. The Celtics haven't had that, although the Celtics have been a very good rebounding team over the last few years. Nobody really pays much attention to that because there's a lot of focus on the center position. And I get it because of what Bam Adebayo did. He was the MVP of the series. I don't think there's any question about that at 6'9". And it masked it was an unfortunate ending. We talk about how the season had an unfortunate ending. It was a very unfortunate ending for Daniel Tice, considering the year that he had, which was pretty phenomenal. And speaking of guys that are going to get paid at some point. And again, it's one of those things like, are you upgrading? Is Andre Drummond an upgrade from Daniel Tice? Well, that really depends on how close you watch the NBA now, because this isn't the NBA of 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Is Andre Drummond going to give you the defense that Daniel Tice gave you this year, and not just against other bigs, right? That's the old school basketball mentality. But now Daniel Tice is guarding point guards in pick and rolls and things like that. Think about what the NBA game is now. That's how you have to situate your roster. And unfortunately, there are players, and Drummond is sort of one of them, who, like Jahlil Okafor. Man, that dude just came into the league at the wrong time. He came into the league at the wrong time. This sort of happened to, Rondo has had this fascinating career arc where the game changed around him, and suddenly a guy that couldn't shoot it was tough to get on the floor. And he found a way. That's what makes, Rondo special, is that he found a way to sort of stay in the league and work around that. But the game sometimes can change, around you. Devin Harris was going to be one of the top point guards in the league when he first came in. He had this great year. I think he made the All-Star team one year with the net. And then the league just sort of changed around him and different guys came in at that position. Andre Drummond now is really more of he's a change of pace, like Serge Ibaka with Toronto, sort of a change of pace role player, except he can't, obviously he's not going to shoot. You have to be able to shoot now. It's just invaluable with the way the game has played. And that 3-point line, by the way, people say, what's coming next? There's going to be an adjustment where, all right, everything's a 3-point line now, so eventually it's going to come back. No. You know what's going to happen? Trae Young, Damian Lillard, that's where the game is going. It's like, forget that 5 feet behind the 3-point line is where the NBA game, that's the next trend. The floor, the only way to extend the floor now is that way, offensively, to make bigs come even farther out to where you can get guys now in high school and college are going to be able to start shooting that shot because they see Trae Young and Damian Lillard do it. And they know that's going to be a part of their ticket to get to the NBA. The guys that can make the 30-foot shots are going to be making $10 million a year, whatever the equivalent of that is, in 5 or 10 years. So that's what would make me nervous about Andre Drummond. He could win you some games. In the course of an 82-game season, Andre Drummond's going to give you some games, but he's just as likely to be a player that you get into a playoff series. And you know what? Like Cantor, who had, Cantor had a very good year and was very effective in spots, but there were certain times he wasn't going to play in the playoffs because of the matchup you get. And I think Andre Drummond, are you going to pay $25, $30 million a year for a guy who might not see the floor in a specific playoff series because of the matchup?
So a buddy of mine who comes on the show from time to time just to poke in and give us some stats and things like that. This isn't a stats analysis, but was sending me a slew of texts this morning about this Andre Drummond thing. And I'm going to tell you just some of what he wrote to me, saying that it's not his favorite thing to do with the Hayward contract. Not terrible either. This obviously trading for Drummond. He's an incredibly flawed player. Still young, has all the skills you'd want from that position. Time Lord's not ready. Tice's a 20-minute-per-game guy. Drummond's best year was when Stan Van Gundy kind of let him play the way Miami used Bam last year. He's got some skills as a passer, a hand-off guy. Defense obviously is a problem, but maybe Brad can get something out of him. I like the idea of him on an expiring contract. And I think adding on to that as much as anything, especially if you were to deal Hayward for him, helps get you under the salary tax. Do you think that is a priority for Wyc Grousbeck right now in terms of attempting to build out this team and take it to the next level?
I think only in terms of flexibility, not in terms of, of finances or not being willing to pay the tax. I think when you're at this level now and you're competing for championships, I don't think that, that's as much of a factor as it would be in other years. Listen, Drummond is an interesting player. Again, I just go back to what I said about can you have a role player? He'd be a very good role player, but the NBA is sort of making him into one right now. And that's you have to think what Danny did, drafting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown or whatever, that was thinking forward. What is the NBA going to be in the next 3 to 5 years and not drafting backwards? It's like you have to evolve so you get players and contracts you can control that fit the game. And now this is a wing game with defending multiple positions. And who fits that? All things being equal, who fits the NBA game now better, Gordon Hayward or Andre Drummond? I mean, there was a time the answer to that question would have been Andre Drummond, but that time is certainly not right now.
Full agreement on that. I mean, I think there's been sort of an overcorrection, so to speak, to the Lakers. Because the Lakers had all this size, right? They have all the size in the world, and they have they have Anthony Davis, and they have JaVale McGee, and they have Dwight Howard, right? And everybody needs to now think about going through the Lakers and how you're going to match up with that size. And I sit here and say, all right, you could think that way, right? But the Lakers are going to be different next year, right? They're going to have a different look. They're not going to be the same team, right? Didn't the Celtics just show you that you can be successful? Did Miami also just show you can be successful not allocating $20 to $30 million to one center position where a guy that can be played off the floor? Like when you're playing crunch time minutes, I don't think Drummond's on the floor. It's going to be sort of not nearly as bad because I think Gobert has a little bit more flexibility as a defensive player. Okay. You're not going to see the people are going to play him off the floor. Bam Adebayo is going to play him off the floor. Teams will find a way to nullify his existence. And if you're going to pay a guy $25 to $30 million, Sean, I want him to be on the floor at the end of games. That doesn't seem like a tall ask in my opinion.
How many of those guys are there? And it seems like the Lakers have all of them.
Right.
So, what's the point? I don't think there's any doubt about that. And you can't say, well, they're big because they have Anthony Davis is a mega star. Okay, in this league, can't look at him and say, okay, you get someone to match up with Anthony Davis because nobody does. And it was the way the Lakers played. But why don't we look at the 2 Lakers-Celtic games this year? You had one that went down to the wire. out in LA, and then you had the game in Boston in which the Celtics, beat the living daylights out of them after the Lakers used their size in the first 2 minutes to take that 8-0 lead or the 6-0 lead or whatever it was. And you're like, oh my goodness. And then essentially the Celtics ran them off the floor the rest of the night. And that's what a lot of teams would do. And again, I'm not saying here that Miami was going to win the NBA Finals, but I'll say this. There's no way if Miami had the same injuries in the conference finals without Adebayo and Dragic, there's no way that Miami beats the Celtics in the conference finals with those injuries. So it was a foregone conclusion when you took those guys out of the mix that the Lakers were going to win. A lot of things fell right. Listen, LeBron is LeBron. And if you don't understand that, you may not say he's the best player to ever play, but if you don't think he's in that conversation, you're blinded by your dislike for him or whatever, and not understanding the historical context. This is one of the 3 or 4 best players ever to play, period. But they also had some things break for them, which is Miami beating the Celtics, certainly, the Clippers, colossally folding the way they did. And they took it. I think that was so frustrating is that there was an opportunity there for the Celtics. That's what drove people crazy. Mm-hmm. And if all the teams in all the world to take advantage of this bubble season opportunity, it was the Lakers that ended up doing it.
Before I ask you another question, where are you at for time? Because I don't want to mess you up.
For you, I got another 15 minutes for you.
Oh, you're the best. Well, so then everything that you just said, and you can't predict injuries. Obviously, I know Miami would have been more competitive with the Lakers had obviously Dragic and Adebayo not been hampered the way that they were, or downright out as they were for multiple games. But had the Celtics beaten Miami, had they survived the heat, had they emerged and faced the Lakers, how do you think that finals would have gone?
It would have been a pretty fascinating series, right? It's like it's easy to say that because the Lakers beat Miami so easily that the Lakers would – I think it would have been a great series. Now, by definition, by what you're talking about, the Celtics would have had to win, come from 3-1 down, win a 7th game, and be pretty beat up by the time you get into it. I'll say this, we're in that Gordon Hayward conversation we had earlier. If Gordon Hayward doesn't get hurt, the Celtics go to the finals, and here's why. Because the Toronto series is not a 7-game series. If Gordon Hayward is in it, Toronto does not win 3 games in that series. And the Celtics, by definition, are not starting behind the 8 ball as they did against Miami, and I'm sure they don't fall down 3-1 if they hadn't gone 7 games with Toronto right before that. So there's a lot of, history once you start pulling threads on it. And, as I've done many times, the best example of that, once you start pulling threads on history, the Celtics draft Robert Swift instead of Al Jefferson, and there's no Kevin Garnett and whatever. So it's a dangerous rabbit hole to climb down. But obviously I think it would have been a very competitive series. And to think that even in a pandemic, with the entire world turned upside down, the Celtics and Lakers still would have found a way to get to the finals against each other would have been one of the great stories of this fascinating sports world that we're in right now.
Yeah. Agreed.
I want to mention very quickly, football obviously is back, and you might not be at a game this year. Many people are, an increasing number across the country. You can still be in on the action regardless at Bet Online, NFL futures. You got the Chiefs, the defending champs, at plus 375 to repeat and win another Super Bowl. Lamar Jackson's Ravens at plus 600. The Seahawks plus 700. Tom Brady's Buccaneers, who continue to play well, plus 1,000. Packers and Aaron Rodgers as he continues this Bleep You tour, plus 1,200. The Patriots, this number gets better every week, which may just be an indication that the team is getting worse every week. You can look at that however you want. But remember, they haven't been healthy. They haven't been practicing. Things may change pretty soon. Plus 4,000 odds to win the Super Bowl if you want to lay a little coin on that coming out of the AFC and maybe make some noise. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on everything imaginable this season, from game spreads and totals to, of course, team, player, and coaching props. BetOnline gives you more options to wager than any other place online. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today. Start off wagering to win division, championship futures today as well. All available to you, and soon enough it will be for the NBA as well. So head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses available to you. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. So as we are here with the Celtics radio voice, Sean Grande, I want to also get into this a little bit. I'm sure you've at least thought about it. Maybe you're looking forward to checking it out yourself, but you've certainly seen the news. for anyone that doesn't know, because you have, as we joke, been in Boston so long, before Boston, Minnesota. And of course, you were calling Timberwolves games back when Kevin Garnett was there the first time and long before he was in Boston. KG announced on Twitter just the other day that he is coming out with a book, KG A to Z, which is described by him as an uncensored encyclopedia of my life, basketball, and everything in between. I think my first and most basic question to you is this going to be the best book ever written?
Well, I would start by saying that Kevin Garnett Uncensored is redundant. In and of itself, I never, as I told him, I saw him at the night before the Kobe thing. Obviously, KG was at the game. I told him, and we talked for a little bit, and I talked about his number retirement in Boston, which I think we've discussed that concept before. That I just can't fathom that there are people that don't think that his number should go up. That boggles my mind. But I complimented him on his performance in the Adam Sandler movie, because I said that must have been incredible. That I'd never heard him speak as many sentences without swearing. So I was like, that was an extraordinary acting.
He was good. He was good in Uncut Gems. I loved it. I loved it.
I'm certainly excited to read it. You never know with these books, right? Like, you never know who gets in the middle of it and how they're organized and how they're structured. So you don't want to build up expectations. But I think he was my favorite player before I went in the league. And then I got to spend 3 years with him in Minnesota, and obviously 6 years with him here at remarkable times in his career. There is no one like him personally, and I think professionally he's sort of destined to, while everyone knows what a great player he is and a Hall of Fame player, I don't think his true greatness and his rank all time, people truly appreciate where he fits among the best of the best ever play. And I've said this many times. I don't think, if you're making the top 12, right, you're making a team. Give me the 12 guys that are the best NBA players ever. KG's probably not on that team, but he's getting a long look at one of those last spots. And by definition, because he was probably the greatest role player ever to play, he almost belongs on that, on that team.
Well, hell, didn't Max say he was the greatest Celtic of all time?
Yeah, and he, that's one of those things like that. That's in the argument of where do you put the Dominique? Where's Dominique on that list, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
1 year here, and he was one of the greatest players ever. And how do you mix all that together? But Kevin Garnett, again, it's the number retirement argument, which I simply, you guys know me well enough to know I will discuss anything. I'm fascinated in people's opinions, and there's always layers to everything. That's one conversation I'm not interested in hearing anybody that thinks that he shouldn't have his number up here because he only played 6. There's no discussion to have. If Kevin Garnett's number doesn't belong in the rafters, there's about 8 of them, including my partners, that need to come down.
No, he transformed the organization and was the true, all due respect, obviously, to Paul Pierce and the captain. But, I mean, Kevin Garnett was the leader of that team, and everybody knows it. And I think Paul would acknowledge that. But do you think I guess on that end, and look, we don't know, we're all just speculating. Do you think this book will release anything new about his time with the Celtics, the Ray Allen rift, things like that? Because he is, like you said, Kevin Garnett uncensored, kind of redundant. Like he speaks his mind. It's all pretty well out there as it is. Is there anything that's going to come out of this book that maybe we don't know?
Well, it depends on what he talks about. And I think we know largely how he feels about the Ray Allen. I think almost every time Kevin Garnett talks, there's something new that sort of does come out. So I think there will be a lot of things about the difficulties with Rondo, in those years. And I think, the Ray Allen thing is going to get, until the 08 team comes back together, the Ray Allen thing is going to live forever until Ray Allen decides it's over and there's going to be some sort of reunion or some sort of, as we've discussed, he had a golden opportunity on Paul Pierce weekend. Mm-hmm. That was the perfect time for him to kind of come back in the fold. But these are great players, have one thing in common.
Ego?
They are stubborn as hell.
Yep.
Okay. That's what makes them great players, because they refuse to lose. Okay. And Ray Allen believes that he didn't do that. What he did was the right path or whatever. He believes that Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, that they sort of turned their back on him, that he had the right to leave, whatever it was. And Kevin Garnett believes, what he believes. So that's going to take a very strong guy. Like, you're talking about Doc Rivers, one of the great peacemakers of all time, and he hasn't been able to make that thing work yet. So, I mean, as you know, we passed a couple of years ago. We passed the 10th anniversary. I'll tell you guys this: there were plans in place. There were reunion plans and dinner stuff, but wasn't going to happen because these guys aren't ready yet to put that behind him. And you see all the big babies and the Tony Allens and the whatever who are they're all into it, right? But it's not going to happen until those guys decide that it is behind them. And you just have to understand the Kevin Garnett mentality of team, that was the ultimate betrayal to leave and go for – well, you and I have had this conversation how it was always fascinating to me that like Al did the exact same thing. Al left and went to the rival and the team that was sort of favored to win this year in Philadelphia. And everybody cheered Al when he came back, whereas Ray got –
hypocrites.
This is the power of Kevin Garnett, right? When Ray came back, he got killed that day. He was booed out of the building that day, and that was fans taking their cue from Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and whatever.
Look, I mean, we won't go into it because we have. I've said this to you 50 times before, both of you, that, I mean, the way Doc left was so much worse than the way Ray Allen left, and he gets resoundingly cheered every time he comes back too. So, yeah, I mean, people are it's sort of, I love Celtics fans. I am a Celtics fan, but it's sort of amazing the level of hypocrisy that exists in the way that we conduct ourselves in so many different ways.
But that's the fun of being a fan, right?
People
short for fanatic, right?
Yeah. And again, it wasn't losing. It was disappointing. It was disappointing to lose to Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals. I just thought some of the extreme stuff really there wasn't enough appreciation at a time in all of our lives where I think we need to be a little more appreciative of everything. And I tried many times during the playoff run in the middle of a great sequence to try and step out of it to say, by the way, this is a miracle what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
In early July, we were saying, well, what's going to happen when LeBron tests positive and he has to sit out, or somebody has Jason Tatum has a fever, so they won't let him play. The idea that the NBA could play a 3-game preseason, 8 seeding games to finish the regular season, and a full 2-month playoff without a single positive test was not even in any of our minds to have a discussion about, because it was not possible. And yet it happened. That it happened in the NHL, and it happened, So I think maybe I was more sensitive to people not appreciating the season that the Celtics had, because it was just almost comical to me how some people were just losing their minds about it when we had this amazing thing happen in front of us. These games were conjured out of nothing and actually took place to the point where it was almost fun that people were losing their minds about it, because it meant, look at what we've done, that we've created this environment again that people have something to lose their minds about.
It was great. We don't want to keep you, pardon me, longer than you've got. So we appreciate you being here with us always. Good friend of the show, obviously, but we always appreciate trips down memory lane and stories and insights and everything else. So I know we'll have you back before the season rolls around, whenever exactly that is. Do you have any insight before you go on that, by the way, or are you just following the reports like us?
Well, I think there are times, I'll tell you guys this. There are times you may ask me a question like that about some inside Celtics thing that I may actually really have some insight that I can't share for whatever reason, because there's things I know. But I can assure you, when it comes to the coronavirus and testing and the science and whatever, none of us have any earthly idea. I think clearly the December thing was never going to happen. Christmas didn't make sense in the environment that we're in anyway. I will tell you that the strong sentiment is owners, players, everybody, we all would like to get fans back in the building somehow, some way. And obviously with some hybrid combination of vaccine, testing, health checks, things like that other sports have done, that certainly is the goal. And with that in mind, you obviously want to start as late as you possibly can. And given the fact that, as I said, it's sort of gained traction, but I really felt as early as August that if you're going to have a holiday that belongs to the NBA, it's not Christmas, it's Martin Luther King Day. So that to me seems like the best target for opening day that checks the most boxes for where we are right now.
I'll tell you though, absent fans, absent media, people like yourself comfortably being in the building, and just all of this that we're going through not being a thing, I love the bubble. I thought the bubble was the purest basketball playoffs maybe we've ever seen. I would do it like that every single year, if not for the fact that people couldn't be there witnessing it. It was unbelievable.
Well, I think what we learned is we spend all this time saying, well, this guy can't play tomorrow because he played 34 minutes instead of 33, which I never I lose my mind at that nonsense. It's like pitch counts. Well, he threw 90 pitches. So if he throws 91, his arm's going to fall off. Like that stuff drives me insane. I think we're learning a lot about travel as it breaks us all down, especially the people that have to play. The fact that the quality of the play was so high, and the fact that nobody had to travel was not a coincidence.
Sean, we'll let you jump out. We're going to keep yapping here for a few more minutes, but